Have the Clippers slid back to earth? Does Doc Rivers even check lineup data? Will the Clips make a trade to solidify their roster? The only question left is, say it with me, you win. Hey, sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown podcast. Today, I am pleased to have friend of the breakdown, Jovan Buha, who is the Clippers beat writer for The Athletic, and a guy who's been around the B-Ball Breakdown hemisphere for a long time and has been on the show. So, Jovan, thanks for coming back on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Coach.
Awesome. Well, I think we should talk about the Clippers since that is your purview. Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the Clippers. A surprising start to the season, and they've kind of hit some hard times over the last perhaps 10 games. They're 4-6. And I kind of want to do a jump-off point here where I'm looking at some of the numbers, and I notice in the last 10 games, their offensive rating has plummeted to 20th in the league in those games. Why?
So recently, specifically the last now 3 games, Danilo Gallinari's been out. And for all the kind of attention and admiration Tobias Harris has gotten as a potential all-star this season, Gallo has actually probably been their most important offensive player. Just kind of the spacing, the playmaking, the efficiency, has been really key for their offense. During that stretch also, Lou Williams missed a couple games. So I think recently that's kind of been what's kind of hampered the team. But overall, like you said, they're 4-6 in their last 10, but the 6 of those losses actually came in their last 8 games. So like this really recent stretch has been tough for them. They went from like a month ago, they were number 1 in the West at this point, or, maybe like 5 weeks ago, they're number 1 in the West. They've slowly been, falling down the standings. They kind of went to that 4 or 5 range, and now they're barely hanging on at 8. So, luckily for them, they have the third easiest schedule the rest of the way, according to most, strength of schedule metrics. But the offense has really plummeted, like you said, and their defense has been terrible. They've been a bottom 3 defense for about 7 weeks now. So, combine, bad offense with really, really bad defense, and you're going to lose a bunch of games. So I think the Clippers kind of are going to benefit. Their next 3 games are against the Bulls, the Kings, and the Hawks. So those are, potentially 3 wins that can kind of get them back on track. But, this team has not been playing well, and really something I just wrote about that I think has been their biggest issue, besides the injuries, has been the starting lineup. And they have not been able to figure out a successful starting lineup yet. Their starting lineup has been the worst lineup in the NBA that's played over 200 minutes. And, they continue to roll with that lineup. And you just look at the lineup data, it's just not working. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Avery Bradley have not worked out well together as a backcourt. Avery Bradley and Marcin Gortat playing together has kind of tanked the team's net rating anytime they're on the court together. So I think they got to experiment with something and kind of mix it up, because as long as they start, that 5-some that they've been starting, they have like a -8 net rating on the season, -20 over like the past month or so. So like it's been really tough with that starting lineup.
Well, okay, a lot to unpack there. So let's go with, the starting lineups. There have been times over the course of my career covering the NBA and interactions with NBA coaches where it sometimes has been clear to me that they don't really look at lineup data, at 5-man net ratings and that kind of stuff. They don't seem to get it. Do the Clippers coaches know about their starting lineup issues?
That's that's a great question. Doc has referenced that in his press conferences of, you guys, as in like, the reporters, analysts, whatever, look at lineup data way more than we do. But so he's like, no coach looks at it as much as you guys look at it, or, think about it the same way you guys think about it. So I would guess not. Like, I know from talking to people around the team, like there have been people who've brought it up to the coaching staff. There are definitely people around the team that are aware of it. I just think and I'm actually interested to get your perspective on this, because they have this weird situation where Montrezl Harrell is by far their best center. Like he is, eons better than Gortat and Boban, and all the lineup data supports that. The eye test supports that. Like Montrezl Harrell is sixth man of the year candidate, most improved player candidate. Like he's been really, really good for the Clippers, and most games he's closing at center for them. Mm-hmm. But for whatever, he's only 6'8". He has a bad tendency of getting into foul trouble against bigger players, most starting centers. So the team prefers him off of the bench, but he's still getting like 26 to 30 minutes every night. The issue is that Marcin Gortat is barely a rotation player at this point. I think on 29 of the other teams in the league would not be starting at center. And Boban, as we've seen, can really only play in certain matchups. Teams that like to get out in transition or run a lot of pick and roll, like they will attack Boban and kind of run him off the court. And that's what's happened recently as he's kind of fallen out of the rotation. So I just wonder from your perspective and experience, like, what do you kind of do in this situation where you have a backup that's so much better than the two kind of starting candidates, but it's like, the Clippers also want to preserve their bench, and the bench lineup with Trez and Lou Williams specifically has been really, really productive. But I kind of just wrote, like, I think they have to start Trez, because at some point you can't start first and third quarters with like, a 6-point deficit, an 8-point deficit like that, that's going to add up. So I don't really know what the answer is, but I do think at some point they really have to entertain starting Montrezl Harrell despite his limitations, just because he's so much better than the other two alternatives.
Okay. Well, yeah, for sure. So here's the thing. We know that Doc has a penchant for wanting players that did well against his teams in the past. Yeah. So we should look up, whether Marcin Gortat has done something amazing when he was with the Wizards or something. I can see how a coach would look at Gortat and think, and then also if you're remembering his career in the past, like good hands, nice touch, big, tough, sets good screens. Like I could see why, okay, there's that traditional big man starting center, but we're not in that era anymore. And either way, what you had said, like it's the data is in, it's not working, and he's not playing well anyway. So I would agree. Now the argument against Montrez starting would be that he's obviously dominating against the second units, so that's probably why he's doing so well versus he wouldn't do so well against the starting centers. I just don't know as far as if you look across the Western Conference. I mean, there are some starting centers that are big and that can post up. That would probably cause some problems. So that would be an issue. Like you think about Jokic, I suppose, and you think about who I'm missing, Boogie now. But there's not that many, and I feel like you might be able to get away with it on the other end too, because he is quicker and more mobile than those guys, and he's tough as nails. Full disclosure, Montrez is on my favorite players list, of which I'm going to do a video. Yeah, I mean, I think that your point is spot on. At this point, no matter what, anybody needs to try and start, even if it's Boban, should try and start versus what they got going now. Now, the Avery Bradley slander is really high and thick on Twitter. I mean, is it only me that hearing it, or are you hearing it too?
Oh no, like it's cooled off a little bit lately because he's been shooting the ball better, and I think like especially the month of January. He's been shooting like just under 40% on threes, which has been a welcomed, addition from when he was shooting under 30% from three for the first like 2/3 of the season. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing with Avery, and I think that's what complicates a center situation, because to me, just as someone who's watched his team from the first day of training camp, been to like 90% of their games, watched them pretty much as closely as anybody, like. I do think, the starting lineup has clearly been unproductive, and the two additions I would make would be starting Montrezl Harrell, for Gortat, and putting in Patrick Beverley for Avery Bradley. I think it's currently, things stand, the Clippers are putting a lot of pressure on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to be the primary ball handler, the primary facilitator and creator out there. And while I think he eventually will get to that point where he could probably shoulder that burden, he can't currently do that. And that's where I think Avery Bradley is kind of a limiting backcourt mate for him, because Avery really is a guy who's only going to spot up, come off pin downs, might back cut sometimes. But for the most part, he's kind of a limited offensive player who really is dependent on other guys creating for him. So I think Patrick Beverley, while, he's not necessarily a traditional point guard, he is capable of secondary ball handling, secondary playmaking. And I think he would complement Shai better, and all the lineup data supports that. So the issue is that Doc loves Avery Bradley, and all season, I was the first person to kind of bring it up in a press conference. He quickly shot me down as if I was crazy. multiple people have brought it up since me. And anytime Avery gets brought up, he almost gets defensive and even a little bit like angry and kind of has an aggressive response to it where, he's kind of like, you guys don't understand how good he is defensively, and our defensive numbers suggest that, he's one of the top defenders in the league, and, he's not out there for his offense and blah, blah, blah. But I think, as we all know, like in the modern NBA, unless you're like an elite defender, all defense type guy, if you can't shoot or play make or do something offensively, it's really hard to play you, especially as a perimeter player. So I think that's where Avery's kind of been, is he's been a solid defender. He's been good on ball for most of the season, but I think off the ball, he's slipped a lot. He gets beat backdoor. He gives up offensive rebounds. And if he's not an elite defender, offensively, he's been horrible. Like, ESPN's offensive RPM has had him as a bottom 5 NBA player offensively all season, and that's out of like 470 players. So, wow. He's been a huge negative offensively.
Well, for what it's worth, he is shooting 41% from 3 on 4.4 attempts over the last 10 games. So that's the biggest part of his role on offense that he should be doing, and he's doing it. I always liked his tenaciousness on defense, but I got to get my defensive cap back on and really watch some of Avery Bradley to see if it catches my eye, because it's a little bit surprising when you're talking about him out there being an issue defensively. But here's the other thing that I think is interesting. In a normal world, for a team that wants to compete for the, let's just say they're competing for the 5th spot in the West or whatever. Yeah. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be a guy coming off the bench as a rookie and playing like 20 minutes a game. They're really grooming him. He's getting good experience, but he's not starting. He's not that stuff. So I don't know if they're kind of getting away with having him there and like finding out that maybe this is not exactly the role with the starters. Now he's playing less than 25 minutes a game the last 10 games, so it's not like he's overplaying. But what do you think about that as far as, should he be getting such a, so much of a burden on him so early?
Well, and that's why I actually suggested in that piece, not to keep plugging that piece, but like,
plug away.
I actually think what's probably going to happen, or maybe should happen, is actually benching Shai and putting Pat in the starting lineup, because Pat is actually, Pat and Avery both started struggling, and that was why, ultimately the Clippers made a starting change. Was Avery and Pat were the 2 starters heading into the season. Avery got injured. Doc inserted Shai into the starting lineup. And the Clippers actually played like arguably their best basketball of the season with Avery out of the lineup. They went 4-2, including wins over the Warriors and Bucks. And, they're playing really well. Then Avery returned. And instead of bringing him off the bench, Doc inserted him into the starting lineup for Pat and has rolled with that Avery and Shai backcourt. But I think if you're looking at like that, those 3 guys as kind of the 2 starting options, if you're saying Avery's the lock, I think Pat makes more sense alongside him, just because the lineup out there supported that more. And like you're saying, like I don't think Shai's kind of hit the rookie wall 2-3 times over the past couple months, where he's just really struggled. He'll have games where he's like 1 for 4 from the floor. You don't even really notice him out there. 1 or 2 assists, and he just kind of can disappear offensively, which is totally normal. Like he's 20 years old. This is his rookie season. He's being thrust onto this team that's trying to make the playoffs and playing 25 plus minutes a night. Like that's tough. Like look at all the other top rookies. They're all for the most part playing on teams in the lottery or that will probably end up in the lottery. Shai is one of the few guys that was a lottery pick that's actually playing on a team with playoff aspirations. So I think from that perspective, he's probably already ahead of the curve. But he does have a tendency. He can be a little passive offensively. He'll pass up open threes. He'll pass up jumpers out of pick and roll. And I think he also is still kind of figuring out his timing offensively with just kind of making reads, delivering passes, kind of driving kicks and stuff like that. So I think from that perspective, like he probably is better suited coming off the bench. But the Clippers have just preferred to start him because he's one of the few guys that can actually penetrate on this team. But to your point, like I think that there probably will come a point where if this team doesn't make the playoffs or kind of gets eliminated, they'll probably just start playing him 30 to 35 minutes. And maybe that's when you bench Avery and Pat and just roll with their younger guys. But I think Shai overall has been impressive. He has this kind of calmness and poise that most rookies don't have, especially at the point guard position. And I think that kind of speaks to Sam Cassell's, development of him and kind of taking him under his wing. But overall, I've been impressed by Shea. But I do think that with kind of the way he's slipped recently, he's played a little better the past couple games, but for the most part, it's trending towards. I think Pat's probably going to replace him in the starting lineup.
Yes. Okay. I would agree, and that's unfortunate. It has to be. It has to be him and not Avery Bradley because clearly it's an 8-point swing when Bradley's playing versus when he's off. And that really hurts them. And it's, again, and like I mentioned with Gortat, like Bradley's another one of those guys where, like, from a coach's perspective, like that's the guy I want. He's a great guy and he's a good locker room presence and he really plays hard. But it's just not working. It is a bit of a bizarre roster when you look overall at like what they have. Mostly sort of these vets, right? Sort of who've been around a long time. Throw in a rookie there. Throw in Montrez, who's like he's a vet at this point. He's what is he, 4th year now? And so, and he's been around the block. So it's a strange team. And I almost feel like when you look at it from top to bottom, I mean, unless they got Danilo Gallinari and Tobias Harris like going full on all cylinders and healthy, like they don't have a chance. Like other than that, right? This almost feels like a team that would be 10th, 11th, 12th when they're looking for a great pick in the lottery. So and then they have Lou Williams coming off the bench. It's just a kind of a weird. It kind of reminds me of like Major League, right? Like a bunch of these weird players have been around the block so many times, and then trying to fit them together. So let me ask you this: what I've noticed about the minutes distribution, though, is that nobody really plays heavy minutes outside of like Tobias. Like I can't even say that Danilo gets. He doesn't play much more than like 30 minutes a game for a starter. It's kind of low.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that and how do they need to play their better players more? Like do a little bit more of a Thibodeau thing?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it needs to be necessarily to that extent, but to your question, like it's been really interesting watching this team's rotation. Like it is almost changed night to night, pretty much every night. Like we never know who's going to be the starting center like any given night. Like, I mean, Gortat has probably started 60 to 70% of the games, but he'll start 5 games in a row, and then Doc will go start Boban for 2 or 3 games, and then recently he just started, Trez for a couple games, and I thought the team played better in those 2 games that he started. But so night to night, like I think part of the minute allocation has just been so weird that it's kind of messed with the averages. Where like Boban. In the games he plays, he's probably playing, more minutes than maybe Gortat, but he just hasn't played in as many games. So that's kind of messing up the distribution. But to your point, I do think that Tobias can probably play a little bit more. I think with Gallo, he has that, notable injury history. So I think the team has just been cautious with him, where they just don't want to tax him at this point. He's, I think he's 29 or 30 at this point. So, he's kind of at that age where he's already, just the body starts to break down a little bit. He's already had multiple injuries. Currently, he's going through back spasms and is out. Won't play tonight, so that'll be his 5th straight missed game. So I think, from that perspective, I kind of get why those 2 guys haven't played as much. The one that's kind of surprised me has actually been Lou Williams, who was playing 33 minutes a night last year, kind of out of necessity during that career year. And they've kind of lowered him. I believe off the top of my head, he's around like 24, 25 minutes a night. Yeah. So from that, like, I still think Lou is their best guard overall. Defensive limitations aside, like the offense really craters, especially down the stretch when Lou Williams is not in there. So Doc has kind of had a weird, he kind of will put him in for offense, then pull him and put Avery or Pat out there and kind of, offense, defense substitutions. But yeah, like at any given night, Doc has kind of gone with the hot hand. There's been nights where someone like a Mike Scott is playing minutes into the 4th quarter and getting 15, 20 minutes. And then the next game, Mike Scott might not play. So Doc really rotates. Like it seems like he has his main 7, 8 guys, and then guys like 9 through 11 can really change any given night. Like he'll throw Milos out there sometimes, or he'll throw Jerome Robinson or Sedarius Thornwell, whoever. So I think it's really just been an up and down season in terms of rotations and minutes, and that's why looking at it from it's kind of minutes per game perspective, it's all over the place, and you don't really know who's going to play any given night. But the one thing is that Avery Bradley has led the team in backcourt minutes, and if you just look at all the lineup data, like the team I think is around like a -5, -6 with Avery out there. So like that's just not working. And I think they've had to make up for those minutes with the other 18 minutes or so the bench is out there, and it's been a lot to ask from the bench.
For sure. I mean, I think someone's going to have to get in there and implore him to really look at more of the lineup data, just because there is evidence with enough numbers here. Like, I'm looking at the lineup data right now. Like, in 22 games, which is like half, it's up there as far as the most. Any of the 5-man lines to play together is 29 games. That's the starters we mentioned. So for 22 games, 80 minutes, which is a lot, it's a plus 22. This lineup: Patrick Beverley, Danilo Gallinari, Montrezl Harrell, Tobias Harris, and Lou Williams. It must be like that's the down the stretch. Right?
That's our closing lineup.
Yeah. And it's like they're blowing teams out, and it's almost like maybe you should find a stretch in the second quarter to play them together as well. I mean, and he could be doing that, but it seems like it's not enough. When you see those kind of lineups and you say, like, why isn't that more impactful or having more minutes? You want to hear another one that's interesting? It has even more minutes than that lineup.
Yeah.
Patrick Beverley, Montrez, Mike Scott, Tyrone Wallace, friend of the breakdown, and Lou Williams is 18.6. So they're like doing a blowout, and they have 116 minutes together over the last in 19 games. Now, that's an interesting lineup, too, because I can't in my mind's eye even picture them on the floor together, but it's a lot of minutes.
Yeah, so that's been their main bench lineup lately. Lou missed some games. They inserted Trez into the starting lineup for a little bit, and then Mike Scott has been in and out of the rotation lately because really when he's not shooting well, which he has actually not shot that well this season, he's not providing much. He's not really a defender. He's not a great rebounder. He's not really a playmaker or passer from like the high post. Not going to like screen and roll and stuff. So he's kind of only served as a spot up shooter for them. And when he's not making shots, Doc will just kind of quickly pull him out of the game. But I think this also speaks to a more interesting, philosophical coaching question, which is kind of staggering versus having your two units, because Doc has always been, at least in LA, from when I've covered him, kind of from when he first got here, he's always been a 2-unit guy, and I think there's pros and cons to both. Having your two separate units versus staggering or kind of mixing the starters and bench, but I think that in this case, it has kind of caused a lot of problems where, Doc has had his like, all right, well, we need to keep Trez and Lou with one lineup, and we need to kind of keep like Tobias and Gallo with another lineup, as those are their 4 primary scorers. I think you got to mix and match it a little bit more. And to his credit, he's done it a little bit recently where he'll keep Tobias or Gallo with the bench for a little bit. But I just think that Doc can probably stagger it a little bit better where, you don't need to have, 2 separate units, especially when you have a team like this that's so deep that can kind of, I think you can just mix and match and kind of go against your opponent based on, their strengths or weaknesses better versus just saying, all right, here's our starters, here's our 5 bench players, and we're going to keep these 2 kind of separate, because I think it has created a lot of issues, more so in the starting lineup than the bench. The bench has been really good, but I think at some point you got to stop sacrificing to kind of have this great bench unit to kind of bolster your starting lineup. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I do think there is something to, when you have a really deep team, you can probably integrate those pieces a little bit better than just keeping them separate. For
sure. And by the way, the way he's doing it can work, but it's not. And that's, I think, the whole point here. And you know what? It's early enough in this season, we're about the halfway point where it's time. So hopefully the little things you're seeing now are the beginning of something else that's going to ultimately, turn around that starting lineup. He's going to have to do something more major than, like, maybe the Shea stuff, putting him on the bench because he won't bench Avery Bradley. Who knows? That might do it anyway. But it's the whole point about when you're coaching is you can get all the X's and O's down and understand how to do that. You can even understand how to communicate with players really well too and motivate. But there's almost no direction and no way to study, the alchemy that is 5-man lineups, except for the fact that after enough games, you can just look at the numbers and it'll tell you a lot. Even though people would want to say, oh, it's context and who are they playing and it's small sample size. I don't think it is at this point. And so, yeah, he needs to do something. And so we'll have to keep our eye on what that's going to be. Do you think they're going to do anything with a trade to kind of upgrade their roster?
So I just wrote a piece about that last night, and from everything I've been told, the Clippers will be entering the deadline as both a buyer and a seller, which is kind of interesting because we're at this weird point in the trade season where there's really only like 6 teams that are looking to be sellers, and those are the bottom 6 teams in the league. Which, off the top of my head, like the Suns, the Grizzlies, the Hawks, the Knicks, the Bulls, and the Cavs. Like those 6 teams are pretty much the only 6 teams that are eliminated from playoff contention at this point. Those teams are trying to sell off assets and players and stuff, but the other 24 teams are kind of all trying to make the playoffs, and all to varying degrees kind of have a shot at making the postseason. So, the Clippers are in an interesting spot because they have so many expiring contracts. Pretty much like 2/3 of this team, almost 3/4 of this team is going to be free agents next summer. So they do have veteran pieces that if a team is desperate enough to make the playoffs, a team like an Orlando, a Detroit, a Charlotte, Brooklyn, that's trying to make the postseason and can get a lot of value just from having a first round exit. I think the Clippers have some pieces, like a Patrick Beverley, an Avery Bradley, a Gortat, a Boban, a Mike Scott. One of those guys can be playoff contributors. Maybe not starters the way some of them are on the Clippers, but 8th, 9th, 10th guys on a shallow kind of roster. So
wait, do that list for me one more time after Boban.
Mike Scott. So Avery, Pat, Gortat, Mike Scott, Boban. Those are kind of the 5 guys. Like the 6th guy would be Luc Mbah a Moute, but he's missed, the last 44 games with a sore left knee, which is its own story. It's been a weird situation where he's been day to day for over 3 months, and I can't remember the last time a guy was listed day to day for 3 months.
That's interesting. And is there any other?
If his name was Markelle Fultz, it'd be a bigger deal, but.
Right.
It just seems like he's had some setbacks, and every time he's close to returning, he has a setback, and it's been frustrating for him. But I think the team is desperately missing Luke because really all their defenses come from Avery Bradley and Patrick Beverley, on the perimeter. So I think adding Luc Mbah a Moute would help a lot. But go back to the Clippers at the deadline. Like I think it seems like their focus really is the 2019 offseason. We all know they're going after Kawhi, they're going after KD, they're going after Jimmy Butler. So they're, ideally not going to take on money at the deadline. If anything, it would probably be selling off pieces. But at the same time, from what I've been told, like they are interested in buying if it's the right deal. So, looking at a couple of their value, acquisitions recently, like extending Lou Williams to a 3-year, $24 million deal. That's definitely below market. Like Lou Williams could have, entered free agency, probably gotten 12 to 15 million a year for maybe only 2 years, but he could have gotten the same amount of money over 2 years, if not a little bit more. Montrezl Harrell signed a 2-year, $12 million deal. Look at that. That's a crazy bargain for the way he's been playing. Like he could easily, have probably gotten a $8 to $12 million deal on the open market. Had the Clippers not had his restricted rights. So I think that. Looking at those types of deals, if the Clippers can get a bargain player at a, sub $10 million, annually value, I think that they might do that. But, for the most part, they're looking at 2019 offseason. They're trying to get a star to kind of go with the current infrastructure that they have. And I think that's really their focus. But they can be a player and they can swing things, I think, at the deadline because they do have some assets. And really the elephant in the room is Gallo because Gallo, will be a $20 million expiring deal next season. I think we'll see what kind of happens with his health over the next few weeks. But, he's had a really good season. He's had a borderline all-star season. He's probably had, frankly, the best season of his career. And, Gallo on an expiring deal at $20 million, like there's a bit of a steep price, but he's probably worth that production-wise if healthy.
Oh, okay. Well, here are the answers. They definitely should trade him, Gallinari, if they can and get a good deal for him, without question. I mean, he's great and he helps him, but you cannot rely on that guy. I'm sorry. I like him. I think he's great, but I think if they could get some good assets back from him, for sure do that. If he could, I guess what their hope is, if he could get healthy again and play, the rest of this year or whatever, healthy, then he would be part of a package. Well, they don't really do sign and trades these days, but maybe that would be something they would need to get that star player. I don't know. I'm not GM, but he would be the guy for sure. I mean, other than if you want to bring a KD or want to bring a Kawhi, then I think the pieces you need to have are Lou Williams. I think Shea is a nice piece of that. Tobias is perfect for that, and Patrick Beverley is perfect for that. And other than that, it's like anybody else they want, or you can get any mileage out of. Please, are they going to trade Teodosic, my favorite player?
That's the guy I would say is the most likely to get moved.
Or is he just going to go back to Europe?
So that's been the thing, is that it's been this weird situation where, I feel bad for the guy, because he came here as, most people were considering him the best player in Europe, not in the NBA. And, he came here last season, he started, he played well, and then 5 games into the season, he suffered a significant injury that kept him out for a few months. Then he came back and it just kind of wasn't the same, and didn't have the same role in the team, and kind of had lost his position with Lou Williams. The Clippers traded for Lou, and they just had some new pieces, Tobias, and it just didn't really fit with Milos. This season, it was kind of looking like, all right, well, maybe he'll start, but probably he'll be kind of the primary backup behind Patrick Beverley, and kind of running the second unit offense. And then Shea, just kind of out of the gate, was very impressive. The coaching staff really spoke highly of him from day one of training camp, and Shea really took that backup spot from Milos. So, from almost the first preseason game, like, Milos saw himself as third on the depth chart. And I think for someone like him, 30-year-old, has been a star overseas, has had a lot of success in international competition with Serbia. Like, he does not see himself, he didn't come to America, to the NBA to be a third string point guard. And I think there clearly are teams out there that could use him, like the Orlando Magic, the Phoenix Suns, even maybe the Spurs, now the Wizards that John Wall's out. Like, there are several teams that could use a point guard upgrade, that I think he'd make a lot of sense for. So from what I've been told and what I reported last night in my trade deadline piece, the Clippers do not have any interest in waiving Teodosic, because he's given a couple interviews to international outlets where he suggested he's not happy. It's been a big adjustment for him, and he is open. He pretty much said, like, after he's done with his NBA contract, he's going back to Europe, but he'd even be happy going back to Europe this season. And from what I've been told, the Clippers have no interest in waiving him and giving him that full, like, I think he's making about $6.2 million. They're not going to waive him, pay him out that 6.2 and let him go back to Europe. They have no interest in that. They view him as, like, the ultimate point guard insurance. Like, he's probably the best third string point guard in the league, but by a wide margin. So they view him as a valuable asset. They do not want to waive him in that capacity. If he's willing to take a buyout and accept less money, or they find a trade partner, I think they will entertain both of those options. So that is something to watch over the next 2 weeks, is, maybe a team like Washington, who really wants to make the postseason, makes an offer for Teodosic, or the Spurs kind of want to, add a point guard to the rotation, or Orlando is another desperate playoff team that might look for a point guard upgrade. So if one of those teams reaches out and they could come to some type of agreement, I could see Teodosic being moved. But otherwise, I would probably bet on them eventually just buying him out later in the season and him going back to Europe. I'd be surprised if he finished the season with the Clippers. I'd probably put it around like 70% he doesn't. But there is still that chance that, maybe someone gets injured, or Doc just changes his mind and puts him back in the rotation and kind of, patches things together for the rest of the year. But I would probably be surprised if Teodosic is a Clipper in mid-April.
Yeah, I'm staring at the Spurs roster, just trying to figure out who they could trade him for, and nothing's really standing out. Like Derek White, another player who's on my favorite players list, maybe that would be something. But right now, since Teodosic isn't even playing, I don't know why the Spurs would even do that. Even though I don't know. So that's a tough one. But he deserves another shot. I believe. And I just feel like because the Sergio Rodriguez not doing so well and Teodosic not doing well, that means like Yui will never come, and that's going to be my biggest bummer, because I would have loved to have seen him in the NBA. And anyway, well, we'll have to see what happens with that, and we'll check back in with you later at Yoban in the season to see how the predictions came about. But thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Nick. This was fun.
You got it. Well, and don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Yoban?
Of course.